Kalimera, good morning. I'm delighted to be here, and I am sorry I can't be there in person. I'm Professor Catherine Itsiopoulos from RMIT University in Australia, presenting today on the Mediterranean Diaita for Health and Longevity, Sustainability of Hellenic Food and Culture and Way of Life. I'd like to thank Varvara Athanasiou Ioannou, the founder and chair of the Food for Thought Network, for the opportunity to be part of the conference today. Distinguished Professor Vassou Apostolopoulos, who's been key to my engagement with FFTN, and my chair today, Maria Macris. So in the next presentation, I'd like to share with you my experience with Mediterranean way of life, Mediterranean diet research, which I've spent my whole career studying, and some reflections on how we can retain the Hellenic Mediterranean way of life for health and longevity. So every time I talk about the Mediterranean way of life, I always reflect on the father of medicine, Hippocrates, who was around 2,500 years ago and considered the father of medicine, and certainly Western medicine. And he changed the thinking of medicine, and the way we reflect on this in today's world is he introduced lifestyle medicine as well, because up until the time of Hippocrates, there was the belief that diseases were caused by the gods or fate. And in the Mediterranean culture, the Greek Mediterranean culture, fatalism was the primary sort of focus. Whereas Hippocrates challenged that and said, illnesses do not come upon us out of the blue. That quote on the bottom left, I love that. They're developed from small daily sins, small daily sins against nature. And when enough of these sins have accumulated, illnesses will suddenly appear. So hence, that link between environment and behavior and illness. He didn't only focus on diet, because he's mostly known for the quote, our food should be our medicine and our medicine should be our food. But Hippocrates also focused on all of these other elements, strengthening, building up the body's inherent resistance to disease. He prescribed the diet, gymnastiki or gymnastics, exercise, massage, hydrotherapy, and sea bathing. And for those in the Mediterranean, you know that the sea bathing is considered nowadays too as very important for health. People will ask, how many times have you been to the beach? And in Greek, it's posa banya hiskani. And it's interesting that is a very ancient tradition that is carried through the ages. So something we should note. I was privileged enough, and now we're looking at where do we see this lifestyle, the Mediterranean lifestyle or the traditional lifestyle in this current day and age. And you will have all heard, no doubt, of the blue zones. Ikaria, an island in Greece, is one of the blue zones, and it's one of the 5 identified blue zones in the world where there are people that live way into their 90s, and a pattern that is very different to other parts of the world. And I've visited Ikaria a few times now, and I have conducted some anthropological studies asking the very old, 90-plus-year-olds, what is your secret to longevity? And this is what they shared with me. They have low levels of stress. They have constant happiness and positivity. They focus on the day, the carpe diem, or seize the day. They don't worry about things like we do. They generally don't smoke, although some of the men do, but generally non-smokers. They have a very active social life, and that is very active in all senses of the word, and they're very productive. So, and you can see some of the photos there of the landscape, of the gardens that they keep. Family coherence is key, eating together, lots of festivals. There is a festival every second day, 100 festivals in the year, and everyone is invited, and people just bring their produce and share. So it's an amazing celebratory environment. They're physically active. The terrain is quite hilly and the roads are really poor. So people do walk around everywhere, and the very old will walk around, and late at night too, when I held most of these interviews were at 10 o'clock, let's meet at a cafe at 10 o'clock at night. And they would get there and they'd just walk, and it's hilly and they're strong, and even into their 90s. The lady on the bottom right there was 107 when I interviewed her, and she only passed in the last year. So, you know, healthy longevity. She was extremely positive and still very active and making those bags and rugs that you can see, the looms behind me. She was actually using them at her age. Plant food diet predominantly and focused on fresh foods, but not exclusively. They do have goat, and you can see a wild goat there, you know, in the background, but predominantly plant foods, and they grow a lot of their own. They are fairly self-subsistent as an island, so they eat what's on the island. Free range and the goats I mentioned, and having purpose. The number one thing. Being chrysimos, being useful in society and having purpose is the number one thing that kept them living long, which was amazing. So now we track to Australia, and you know, in the diaspora, and how do we translate that traditional way of life there? And I'd like to refer to some work that we've done down under, and that is the Australian Meta Study. And the Meta Study is led by a group of researchers, the Demosthenis Panagiotakos here in Karakoupia University in Athens, and a broad range of collaborators, including Labrosidosis, who I collaborate with. But we can see on the screen there Antonia Thodis, Dr. Antonia Thodis and Professor Antigoni Kouris. And Antonia did her PhD with the Australian Meta Study. Antigoni was a collaborator together with myself. We supervised. So Antonia found out or discovered in her PhD that the elderly Greeks, migrants in Australia, were living long, and you can see the article there on the top right, the miracle migrants. And, you know, why do we have Australian Greek migrants living longer in Australia than back in Greece? Well, that is because they've retained a lot of the cultural elements of the Mediterranean way of life. And one important thing is keeping your home garden. And of all of the Greeks that Antonia interviewed, 75% of them had a garden, that home garden, still into their 80s. And they grew onions, garlic, tomatoes, cucumbers. You can see in the pictures on the bottom there, this is the backyard of my dear late mother, where my daughters, you know, we were growing some snow peas, and we used them in a dish, and Vivian cooked that dish. But growing your own, sharing the food, cooking your own food, and especially eating a lot of the wild edible greens, was really an important part of the health and longevity, certainly of Greek migrants. And what Antonia found was that those that grew these vegetables in their backyard and obviously consumed them had lower levels of risk factors like blood pressure, high blood pressure. The benefits of growing your home garden is shown there in the green highlight. It ensures you're physically active because it's a very physical activity. You know, you're bending and you're using your muscles. You're going to eat more plant foods because you're growing your own food and they taste wonderful. You're getting more sunshine, vitamin D, critically important in all diseases. That sharing, that social connectivity, which is very important, social activity, and sustainability. Why are we worried about diet and what is happening in the world? And these are data from Australia, and they're not different around the world. But what we're seeing is a very high rates of diabetes, and diabetes is a silent disease where you don't feel the symptoms until you know they are more severe. So screening is very important. But these are diet-related diseases that I'm referring to here. We've got high prevalence of cardiovascular disease or heart disease, and that continues. Women in the postmenopausal state have increasing levels of heart disease, those matching men. They are protected premenopausally, but not once they hit menopause. And obesity, you know, when you're overweight, particularly around the abdominal area, it reduces your life expectancy because obesity links to cardiovascular disease, heart disease, and reduces your quality of life and your lifespan. But sitting is the new risk factor as well. And what we find is that close to 20% increased risk of death from all causes when you have prolonged periods of sitting more than 6 hours a day. The studies I'm showing on the right show that you can reduce 90%. The InterHeart study, which is an international study of over 80 countries. So it's not specific to any particular country, but what it shows is that when you follow a healthy lifestyle, with plant-predominant foods and exercise, like a Mediterranean way of life, you can reduce your chance of heart disease by 90%. And the last data on the right are all about the Mediterranean diet. PREDIMED study, very famous Spanish study showing 52% reduction in presentation of diabetes and a 30% reduction in heart disease and heart disease related deaths when you follow a Mediterranean diet versus a low-fat diet, which was the standard diet for years for heart disease. But now Mediterranean diet is becoming the most important diet in preventing heart disease worldwide, not just in the Mediterranean. But what is happening around the world? We know that Mediterraneans are moving away from a Mediterranean lifestyle rapidly. And this is a picture that was very interesting. And I thought, if you need a pizza in the middle of the night, you can get it through the wall. And this is in France. But I have seen lots of fast food outlets across the Mediterranean, including Greece. So this is not traditional Mediterranean. Of course, we have pizzas and pizza, and we have that in moderation, but not as a staple food. So just beware. We are working as epidemiologists and public health nutritionists and health practitioners to return populations in the Mediterranean back to traditional ways of eating. That's our challenge. So what we have done is set up an institute in Leros, and I'm a vice president or co-founder of the Mediterranean Lifestyle Medicine Institute, which was launched in Leros in Greece. And sorry, I've gone back. And we our challenge is to define the Mediterranean way of life across all of the pillars of lifestyle medicine, and then develop strategies for implementing a Mediterranean way of life across the world. And you can see a picture of the founders here. So we've got Lavros Sidosis, who's the president, and Rob Lawson, who's the chair of the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine. He's also vice president, co-chair, and that's myself here. And we launched it, and this is these are dignitaries from the island of Leros, the mayor, who donated this facility for us to set up this institute in Leros. They embraced the institute and were very happy to collaborate with us to return Greek Mediterraneans back to a traditional Mediterranean diet. So the work continues, and what we did last year was had a scientific meeting, our inaugural scientific meeting. We met under the olive trees, like the old philosophers back in the ancient times. And that's me together with Lavros and Rob presenting. And we collectively, and this is my Mediterranean food group, the nutrition pillar, we collectively defined Mediterranean lifestyle, and we've just published a paper, which I'll show you in a moment. So by definition, our definition is that the traditional Mediterranean lifestyle is a diverse and adaptable way of living, and key aspects are conviviality, that social connectedness across the lifespan, a purposeful life, strong sense of community and family values, connection with nature, the lived environment, deep-rooted in spirituality, religious practices, local customs, acquired resilience through adversity, and a sense of moderation in all aspects of life. And this is our diagram, which shows moderation at the bottom and all of the key pillars of the traditional Mediterranean lifestyle. And we published this paper, only just published in August, and it's available via free open access. And we have a collective authorship of about 50 scientists from around the world who have years of experience in research and practice in a Mediterranean way of life. Nutrition, physical activity, social connectedness, sleep, and managing stress and avoiding harmful substances. They're the 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine. So what are some of the lessons from the Australian diaspora? And here I'm going to touch on very, very briefly, in the interest of time, the studies that I have led in my career over the last 25 to 30 years, and that I am part of, that others have also championed. When I started my work on the Mediterranean diet back in the mid-1990s, there were very, very few trials on the Mediterranean diet, and not many people were following the Mediterranean diet in Australia if you were not Greek Mediterranean or or Italian or Spanish. And many foods like eggplants were unheard of, and olive oil, we had to search high and wide to find olive oil. Times have changed now, and we have a very rich source of foods, but not back then. So in my first dietary trials, and my first ever trial was this one here: can the Mediterranean diet, can the Mediterranean diet improve diabetes or lower HbA1c, which is a measure of diabetes control? I had to use olive oil that was imported from Crete because olive oil wasn't available abundantly in the 1990s. So what we found in this the first study ever in Australia on diabetes and Mediterranean diet was that Mediterranean diet was very good for type 2 diabetes. We've investigated Mediterranean diet led by a PhD student of mine, Hannah Ma, who's now Dr. Hannah Ma, improving cardiovascular disease risk factors, metabolic syndrome. Another PhD student, Katerina Sarapis, led that study. Fatty liver, we reversed fatty liver by fatty liver by 40%. One of the first trials, worldwide trials, reversing fatty liver using the Mediterranean diet. Collaborators are shown there in the paper. Reducing lung inflammation in children who have asthma, and there was a PhD again led by Maria Papamichail from Athens, and this is a population in Athens. So we did run this study in children in Athens, and these trials are underway, reversing Alzheimer's and dementia risk factors using the Mediterranean diet. And we also published the world's first study reversing depression and anxiety using the Mediterranean diet. So extensive studies from Australia using Mediterranean diet in populations that are not Greek, multicultural, and we've been able to modify the diet for multicultural populations. This is a picture of my dear late mother, Theano Itsiopoulos, making dolmades by hand. So what we did with this first ever study, and I've published a cookbook of my mother's recipes, and this is Anna, a friend, who they cooked all of the foods, and the participants loved the foods. We found it very hard to move them off the Mediterranean diet when they finished the study. So all of the studies that we've shown health benefits for using the Greek Mediterranean diet, I must add, showed health benefits independent of weight loss. So it wasn't necessary to lose weight. You could still have all of the health benefits, and we provided the food. And that word ad libitum means eat until you're full. So it's not a restrictive diet. It was a diet that all participants of any cultural background loved, and they kept on to it. Some other studies, and we've collaborated again with Labrosidosis and his colleagues from Kharkopio and University of Rutgers in the States, United States, as well, and together with our MEDIS group and Antonia Thodis, Antigone Kouris, looking at successful aging index and linked to Mediterranean lifestyle. And what we found was we studied Greeks in Greece, Greeks in Australia, and Greeks in America. And we found that Greeks in Australia and Greeks in America, those abroad, had a better successful aging index than the Greeks in Greece. Why? Because of all of these risk factors, improved risk factors for better weight, better health, closer weight, healthy weight, more physical activity, lower risk factors, more social connectedness. They even adhered more to the Mediterranean diet. And part of that, and we've done some sociocultural studies as well, and what we found is that the Greeks abroad tend to retain the culture. They hold on to the traditions. And many of those traditions are health related, which is fantastic. So, interesting findings that we see abroad. So just to finish off, in the interest of time, I just wanted to show a few of the tools that we are using in order to support the translation of the Mediterranean way of life to populations around the world, including Mediterranean. But my work is focused on implementing Mediterranean diet in Australia. So the Sustainable Mediterranean Diet Pyramid is used. It was just published fairly recently. And the difference between this pyramid, and some of you interested in nutrition will have seen pyramids that show unhealthy foods at the top, healthy foods at the bottom, in the middle, those in moderation. And you can see all that detail in this pyramid. What makes this pyramid different is that this is a lifestyle medicine pyramid, and it focuses on sustainability. So this pyramid is healthy for the environment, not only for us. So it considers all of those factors of sustainability, which is critically important to this conference. So what we see at the bottom in those pictures is not just focusing on healthy diet, Mediterranean diet, which is rich in olive oil, lots of plant foods. Water is our main beverage, and the teas, the infused teas, which are rich in antioxidants, and we've got nuts there as a snack, and yogurt and all of those things, and proteins in moderation, and the processed foods very sparingly. So ice cream and cakes and processed foods very sparingly. But on the bottom, exercise, getting adequate rest, that siesta, that hypno in the afternoon, very important if you can fit it in, 20 minutes, half an hour. But getting good sleep is important. Social connectedness, eating together, and eating a variety of foods, and eating fresh and locally. And what that reflects is those pillars of lifestyle medicine. And this is an image from the British Society of Lifestyle Medicine showing those 6 pillars that I mentioned earlier. And what we're doing with the Mediterranean Lifestyle Medicine Institute is translating these 6 pillars using a Greek Mediterranean primarily context. And we've shown that in that publication I showed you earlier. This is a nutrition slide on what's important about the traditional Mediterranean diet. It's got an ideal ratio of healthy fats, moderate carbohydrates, and healthy proteins, which are rich in, fish like omega-3s, anti-inflammatory nutrients, antioxidant rich, low environmental footprint, because plant foods have got less of an impact on the environment than animal foods, and economically accessible. Plant foods and legumes are a cheaper protein source than animal products. And these are all the nutrition benefits that you see in the slide in the middle. These are the 10 principles of following a Mediterranean diet that have been derived from my PhD work and a lot of the research I've done in the last 25 years. I will leave that slide for you to take away to implement in your own life, but you can see it's semi-quantitative. So extra virgin olive oil as the oil that you use every day. If you're going to do one thing with your diet to make it more Mediterranean, you introduce extra virgin olive oil, and extra virgin is the best type of oil. Try to limit any other oils that you use because it's extra virgin has antioxidant, anti-inflammatory nutrients, whereas other oils, pure olive oil doesn't. It's extracted and it doesn't. So that's the health benefit of the different types of oils. But you can see vegetables and salads are predominant. Herbs and spices for flavouring your foods are predominant. So we're not using salt and spices that are associated with high blood pressure. Legumes are a key source of protein. So they're the sort of key elements. Fish are important a few times a week, limiting meat and chicken to a few times a week or small quantities. Sourdough breads are key, and the snacks and what you eat after a meal are fresh fruits, not your dessert. The dessert is for special occasions, but yogurt and nuts in between. They're your healthy snacks. Your plate should look like this: small amount of animal foods, mostly plant foods. So that's a guide for what your plate should look like. This is how we've made a Mediterranean and a non-Mediterranean way of eating into more Mediterranean. For those of you that are nutritionists in the audience, you might be interested in just unpacking this. A cookbook I've just launched with my daughter, my youngest daughter, Vivian Koutsis, is to translate the Mediterranean diet to all age groups, because what we're finding is traditional recipes might be a bit complex. They take a lot longer to cook. They might be unfamiliar to younger populations or to different cultures, and we should try them when we've got more time, like yemistar. They take about, or moussaka takes 3 hours to cook. You might do that on the weekend. But the modern Mediterranean diet has the key ingredients of a Mediterranean diet applied to a more modern cuisine. So there's elements of sustainability in this cookbook, and I was delighted to work with my daughters, because my older daughter has provided a lot of the guidance around the imagery for that book. The other cookbooks here shown on the screen are different recipes and menus that I've used in the research that I've conducted through the years that might be helpful. for those of you that want to use them in your own clinical practice. If you're practitioners, many of these books are used in clinical trials in Australia. So to finish up, how do we implement the Mediterranean diet? How do we translate this Mediterranean lifestyle, I should say? Live like an Icarian. I mentioned about the Icarians, how they follow a very healthy way of life. So live like an Icarian for health and longevity. Homegrown health, a plant-predominant diet with healthy fats and oils. Choose free-range produce. Enjoy social eating with family and friends wherever possible. Stay physically active. Walk everywhere. Get high-quality rest. Try and have an afternoon siesta if you can. Have a positive outlook on life. Try not to stress. Don't sweat the small stuff. Everything in moderation. Remember the ancient philosophers, pan metron ariston, and make sure what you do has purpose. So to finish up, and this is an image from Icaria, the traditional Mediterranean dieta, a sustainable solution for health and longevity. Yamas, and thank you very much for the opportunity to share my experience and my thoughts with you today. Have a great conference. Bye-bye.